the Faster Than Light radio show.
Hi and welcome once again to the show. Thanks for joining us. Ahead of you in the next half hour is, well, discussion and comment on science fiction and fantasy. What else would you expect on the Faster Than Light radio show? In fact, I received a number of telephone calls last week commenting on the sorts of books that I thought ought to be on the Hugo ballot. That's in fact one of the things I was talking about last week. Thank you, Jonathan. I really think that I probably should be standing with my hands behind my back and my head bowed. I haven't read all the best books that came out in 1984, and I'd be the first to admit it. Who has time to read all the books, let alone all the best books? The problem is that because I'm looking here on radio at the science fiction and fantasy that comes into our bookstores and into the newsagents and the places where we buy our science fiction and fantasy in Perth, I'm mainly looking at English published science fiction and fantasy. And obviously the Hugo ballot is mainly American works. So what I was talking about last week was the need for a balance, that we as Australians, as reading the English published works, need to somehow get the works that we enjoy onto the Hugo ballot so that it reflects more in total, the Hugo ballot, the world publishing scene of science fiction. Since last week's show, I've thought about a number of others, and people have suggested to me books that have come out here in the English-speaking part of the world, the English publishing part of the world. The Americans still like to think they speak English, and a couple of these I really ought to pass on to you for your consideration for the Hugo ballot. Amongst the fantasy novels for last year, there were two very big English published works. Robert Adams' new novel, Maya, which I haven't seen. It's only been available in hardcover, and Viking, that's the New Penguin hardcover imprint name, brought it out towards the end of last year. And Gollancz towards the end of last year, and it is available in Australia now, brought out Robert Holdstock's new novel, Mythago Wood. John Hall Freeman from Space Merchants tells me that it's a wonderful novel and the best that Robert Holdstock's written to date, kicks him up another level in his estimation as an author. I've certainly enjoyed Robert Holdstock's 3 novels to date, and I'm looking forward to enjoying Mythago Wood. I hope to have that read for you in the next month so that I can make some comments about it. But if you are one of those that have read it and it does fall into your category of some of the best work you've seen in 1984, don't forget to include it on the Hugo ballot. There are a number of other works around that I failed to mention, and a number of non-fiction works which came to mind last week after the program had gone to air. One of these is the new book of George Turner's, In the Heart or in the Head. This is readily available around town, and certainly Space Merchants have still got copies, and to me it's one of the best things that's been written about science fiction and about the way in which an author perceives the work as he's writing it. George is more than just an author of science fiction, because he's been the Age's main critic on the East Coast of science fiction, and has meant for a lot of readers looking at science fiction through different eyes, perceiving it in different ways, the sort of stuff that they pick up and read from week to week. George, in his semi-autobiographical work, because a lot of it happens to be critical, a lot of it's critical of science fiction as a genre, and is critical work in that it talks about science fiction, in the Heart or in the Head. This semi-autobiographical work, I think, deserves a place on the best of the non-fiction Hugo works for 1984. Also out there you might like to include, but here you would be stepping on American toes all over the place, I'm sure, Damien Broderick's Transmitters. It's such an in-house, very Australian sort of novel that I think it would be hard for some people to understand what it is Damien was talking about. If you haven't been let in on the in-joke that Transmitters is, then by all means pick up a copy of that too and have a read. Ebony Press, and I've talked about them and their works on a program only 2 or 3 weeks ago, have made it available, and there's plenty of copies in at Space Merchants at the moment. By the way, the copies that Space Merchants took delivery of last week are signed by Damien, and you might like to get hold of one of those for your collections. That's Transmitters. It's, well, I suppose you could call it autobiographical, and I suppose you could call it non-fiction, although it's written as a work of fiction. Well, if you don't know what I mean and you're wanting to be let in on the secret, catch up with Transmitters. It's an ebony paperback, and like I say, it's available at Space Merchants if you can't find it elsewhere around town. Well, that's enough of the preamble to set the show to start with. One other major piece of news that came my way this week is the fact that the BBC has decided to terminate, wait for it, gasp, horror, shock, Doctor Who. They aren't going to make any more. They've decided they haven't got enough money, and what money they have got they're going to put into other science fictional projects. But I mean, it's a whole generation, it's a whole era of science fiction on television that'll come to a close. And what will the ABC do with 6:30 every night? Well, we all now know what the ABC is going to do with 6:30 every night. They're going to put on the National. So maybe the ABC too has been let in on the secret and they don't want Doctor Who back anymore. It is for us, Doctor Who fans, ardent as we are and nearly 2 decades now of watching Doctor Who on television, it's for us to rally round the flag and make sure that the BBC does see its role as presenting Doctor Who to the universe, if not the world's generations to come. So, there is something you can do besides crying over your radio sets or your car radios if you're listening to this in the car, and that is you can go into Space Merchants and sign a petition that's there on the front counter, which will be sent off to the BBC, imploring them from the far Antipodean length of the British Empire that we do want Doctor Who back on our television screens, and we wish them to keep spending their very inexpensive British pounds these days on making Doctor Who. By the way, I do hope that the BBC carries up its other levels of science fiction production, and this isn't seen as a general decline in giving their great dramatic weight to science fiction. They're 1/3 of the way into doing John Christopher's The Tripod Trilogy, and from all intents and purposes coming out of Britain, all the critical statements about the first 13 episodes, it is a lavish and very, very good production. Seems to have been made somewhat with the mixed eye that Doctor Who has in its latest sorts of forms. That is, the audience is seen as both adults and the kids that are staying up to watch television. Tripods was very well received, as I said, by the critics, and seems to have had a very good rating. So we can look forward to that, but we'd also like to be seeing Doctor Who. I'll return in just a moment with some more news about Doctor Who.
Paperback
Well, in paperbacks, there are a number of Doctor Who books that have recently been put on the stands by Gordon and Gotch, and they're the 3 latest novels in the Doctor Who Target series. The series has been numbered from about the 70s on, so these days you can put them all on your shelves and make sure you've got a complete collection. And the 3 latest ones, just to add insult to injury, are 88, 90 and 91. I don't know what happened to 89, but there don't seem to be any in there on Gordon and Gotch's shelves, and George Proud, the manager, was saying to me that he doesn't think he's seen 89 as yet. But anyway, 88, 90 and 91 have been released over consecutive months, and 91 is the most recent. The 2 novels that are 88 and 90 in the Doctor Who series are The Aztecs and The Highlanders. You might be forgiven for thinking, when on earth did I see those series? Well, if you're not 20, then you won't have seen The Aztecs, because it came out before you were born. If you are around about 30, you may well remember it. I'm pretty sure it was one of the earliest episodes shown here in Australia of the Doctor Who series. The Aztecs is one of the Doctor Who episodes that comes from, I think, the 2nd series of Doctor Who, but it was certainly back in the time when Doctor Who was very much stuck in the idea of costume drama. They used to take Doctor Who from one ancient civilization to another simply because the BBC wardrobe had lots of costumes for that particular group of antiquated characters. So the Aztecs, Doctor Who arrives in an Inca city and has a particular adventure with that group of people. The Highlanders is much the same. It comes out of the 4th or maybe the 5th series of Doctor Who, so we're still around about the 1966-1967 stage in Doctor Who's development. And the Highlanders too is somewhat a costume drama, with Doctor Who getting caught up in the history of the Scots and Bonnie Prince Charlie and the defeat of the English at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. My memory serves me well, it was quite a strong episode. I wonder if Jerry Davis's adaptation of the script serves equally as well to bring home the story. The last novel, and the most recently released, Frontius, is from the Doctor Who series we've yet to see. It's a Christopher Bridmead adaptation of his own script, and it was screened in 1984 in Great Britain, and we've yet to see that episode of Doctor Who here in Australia. So if you want to catch up with the latest Doctor Who, then get yourself Doctor Who novel number 91. And for Doctor Who buffs, and I'm sure there are a lot out there, if you really want to test your knowledge, and you've read all 91 books, with the exception of 89, and you've got all of those on your shelves and you're wanting to see if you've remembered it all, then Target Books have released a book just for you. Doctor Who Brain Teasers and Mind Benders by Adrian Heath. It'll cost you $4.50, but the sort of nerve-wracking hair-pulling that comes from trying to do these sorts of books will cost you a lot more, I'm sure, in medical bills. It starts off with a quick little test for you. So you think you know about who? What type of TARDIS is the Doctor's, is the second question they ask. A little further down in question 16, how is Davros crippled? For those of you who don't know Doctor Who, you'll have to ask who the heck is Davros. What was ECCO? What grade did Romana get at the Academy on Gallifrey? That was one I knew. There you are. I must have remembered that episode. And there are others. In fact, there are 35 questions to begin. If you get 0 to 15, you probably don't know that much about Doctor Who yet. If you get 16 to 25, so the author says, your knowledge of Doctor Who is quite good. If you get 26 to 30, your knowledge of Doctor Who is very good. And if you get 31 to 35, that's almost 100%, your knowledge of Doctor Who is excellent. And it's an excellent knowledge of Doctor Who you'll need to cope with the second part of the book, which takes up some 100-odd pages, and that is the puzzles, all based on questions based on the series of Doctor Who. Should keep you entertained for hours. And for those of you at school who are in that situation where you have USSR, what is it called? Unsustained silent reading or something of that nature, Doctor Who's Brain Teasers and Mindbenders is just for you, because it requires reading and you can work it out with a pencil and paper. Something to cheat the teachers and not have you read a boring novel that you don't want to read. But then again, that's what USSR is all about. As I said, $4.50. It should be available in the newsagents now. If not, you can get it from any good bookstore or from our specialty store here in Western Australia, Space Merchants. A couple of other things that Gordon and Gotch have been sending out and which I've been catching up with. One of them is the magazine Space Voyager, which goes out quite regularly, and it has a lot of information in it about model building. In fact, the group that started to put it together in Britain some 3 years ago now were model builders, so it's no wonder that most of the articles in here give you great rundowns on how the movies and the television series put together the effects that they do bring us on the little and the large screen. There is a good column in it, however, from Randy and Jean-Marc Lossifer from Hollywood, and they've brought some information that I've not seen before. One piece of information has to do with Jean M. Auroul's best-selling novels The Clan of the Cave Bear and The Valley of Horses, both available through Hodder and Stoughton as Coronet paperbacks, and I know a lot of fantasy readers that are really enjoying this particular series. It seems that both films are making their way to the large screen, and that shooting started the middle of last year. What really impressed me was the fact that Daryl Hannah, one of my favourite ladies who starred in Splash and Blade Runner, is playing the part of Alia, the Cro-Magnon cave woman who is beautiful by our standards but not by her people's because they're Neanderthals. And she's cast out of her own clan and she becomes the leader of the new people. Well, it's an interesting story and I'm sure it'll adapt well to the large screen, and Daryl Hannah being the sort of quirky actress that she is, she'll make it a wonderful part. By the way, Jean Auroul is working on the third volume in the series The Mammoth Hunters, and I believe that she'll be with us sometime this year. There are other movies in the wind, but one of the things I read over the weekend that caught my mind and my mind's eye and has stayed there for passing on to you is the fact that Sybil Danning is one of the stars in the series of V, which is coming to television after the miniseries which was so successful both here and in America last year. I hated the series. In fact, I was one of the many critics who panned it and thought it was abysmal in its plotting, its storyline, its abysmal special effects and everything else, but people seemed to like it. If Sybil Danning plays part in anything, then I might be somehow tempted to like the look of V the series on television. By the way, Sybil Danning's also starring in Howling, the second Howling movie, Howling 2, and that might be a horror movie I go out to see as well. Sybil Danning's one of my favourite ladies. For all of you who don't have favourite ladies but have favourite men, there was news too over the weekend about Mel Gibson's new Mad Max 3, or if you're American, Road Warrior number 2. And Mad Max 3, a little bit of the plot was revealed. Evidently Mad Max in this series, in this new episode of Mad Max, and I suppose we could call them episodes, George Miller seems to be making them endlessly these days, one of the few things that keeps him in money. It appears in Mad Max 3 that Mad Max is going to lead a group of feral kids on an adventure, not just the one that he had in Mad Max 2. But as I said, the plot's being kept so tightly under wraps, what with Tina Turner in it and Mel Gibson and others, there's a lot of information bubbling around. Who knows how much of it is true and how much of it is just pre-publicity for the film itself. We should get a look at that sometime this year. Talking of movies, let's have a look back at a movie we really enjoyed over the summer and which I hope we get a chance to see a number of times this year in special screenings either at the independent cinemas or out at FTI or maybe even out at Wait at BFC. I'm talking about Metropolis, the Giorgio Moroder, not necessarily remake but remix of the movie to give it a modern feel and certainly to re-establish the story. Here's a track from the movie's score which is very strong indeed and one you ought to get for your collection. Pat Benatar singing from Metropolis.
scouring the galaxies to bring science fiction and fantasy to Perth, is our sponsor, Space Merchants. New release and out-of-print books, film and TV tie-ins, magazines, comics and related merchandise await the adventurous at 1 Forest Street in Subiaco. 6UVSFM thanks our sponsor, Space Merchants.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Faster Than Light radio show. If my voice is unfamiliar to you, that's because I'm unfamiliar to you. My name is Harry Harrison. I'm a science fiction writer.
Thanks, Harry. Well, you're in the second half of the Faster Than Light radio show. Grant Stone with you for another 10 minutes this week, or thereabouts, and some more news about what's out there for you to purchase. I think that's a good way to put it. First of all, something to tempt you with. Venture Science Fiction is a new imprint that Hamlin paperbacks are going to be bringing to our stores around about June, July of this year. And I was quite interested to see that Hamlin have decided to head in a new direction. You might remember Hamlin paperbacks. They've been limping along 1 or 2 volumes a year. They're now picked up and distributed here in Western Australia by Gordon and Gotch. And recently Hamlin were bought out by Hutchinson, which also imprint Arrow paperbacks. It seems that they're going to use Hamlin as a staging ground for a new launch into science fiction. Their blurb says the popular appeal of science fiction has been boosted greatly by the all-action Star Wars films and their like, but apart from the tie-in novels, SF in capital letters in book form seems to have deserted the space adventure novel for the more technical and science fantasy genres. It is into this gap and in the market that Hamlin Paperbacks launches Venture SF, a new series by the master of the genre. Well, you got what the genre was, didn't you? It's space adventure novel. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that'll enjoy reading these particular books. Some of them are reprints and a number of them are new novels. The sort of people they plan on putting out in their first 4 months of operation are, well, Edmund Hamilton's Star Wolf, the classic trilogy now in 1 volume. They also plan on putting out John Brunner's Interstellar Empire, David Drake's Hammers Slammers, Philip E. High's Come Hunt and Earthman, and they're also planning on starting off with Richard Meredith's We All Died at Breakaway Station. Good titles, interesting material, and I'll keep you up to date with that when in fact it does break here in Western Australia. Talking of space opera and faster than light stuff, here on the Faster Than Light radio show, John Hall Freeman, the entertaining and very much enterprising man down at Space Merchants, gave me a copy a couple of weeks ago of Faster Than Light. It's edited by Jack Darn and George Zabrowski, and it's a collection of stories and articles from 14 top science fiction writers that hurl you out into the solar system and into the future around the theme of faster than light. John thought it was such an appropriate book to give away on the show that he gave me a copy from his shelves. I would like to give it to one of you listeners, and what I'd like you to do is write me out on a piece of paper how many years you think it is since the Faster Than Light radio show started here in Western Australia. I'll give you a hint. It's not as many as 6, and it's 1 more than 4, and I haven't spent all of them here on 6UVSFM. There you go. So please tell me how many years we've had the Faster Than Light radio show here in Western Australia. Put it on an envelope. Please give me your address as well, and mail it to either Grant Stone, care of Murdoch University Library, Murdoch 6153, or to Grant Stone Faster Than Light Radio Show, care of 6UVSFM. That's the University of Western Australia, Crawley 6008. Good stuff. I'd love to give you a copy of a very enjoyable collection of stories. By the way, the book was originally published in the mid-70s and is available these days as an ace paperback, and that's what I've got to give to you. Talking of paperbacks and thinking a little as we were earlier about the small screen in our life and the demise of Doctor Who, we really all ought to go in and sign that petition, you know. I'll have to hark on about that if you haven't all done that by next week. There is another of the Blake 7 books that became available towards the beginning of this year. Tony Attwood considered the demise of Blake 7, and as we've just watched the last episode of the 4th series again here in Western Australia, it's probably about time that you picked up Afterlife and read the conclusion, the authentic sequel to the great TV series and what happened to all those characters. Were they all destroyed? What's happened to Servalan? Did Avon manage to survive the fire-out attack at the very end of the series? Well, those answers await you in Blake 7 Afterlife. It's a Target paperback, and you can have it for around about $4.95. A couple of other things that have come my way and which I've enjoyed reading, this time in the comic form rather than in the heavily worded form. One of them is Starstruck. I mentioned Starstruck when it was being episodically released in heavy metal about 2 years ago now. The lady who originally conceived the idea, Elaine Lee, put it out as a Broadway production and somewhat as a musical. It was a bit of a sci-fi spoof, but somehow lovingly put together. And she worked with Mike Kaluta, one of the Marvel comic book artists, but he designed stage settings and costumes and somehow got totally tied up in the universe of Starstruck. When they worked on the comic strip story together, they produced what I believe is some of the better comedy science fiction comics that you could care to pick up. It's very good material, beautifully coloured, beautifully drawn, and it's now available as a Marvel graphic novel. It's Marvel graphic novel number 13, was released by Gordon and Gotch here in Western Australia in the last month, and you can pick up a copy for around about $7.95. I got a copy from Space Merchants, and there are others there. Do introduce yourself to the world of Galatian 9, Erotica Anne, and Drusilla as the Caribbean slave. There's some wonderful characters in this series, and there are some wonderful adventures had in Starstruck. Evidently the graphic novel, as is often the case these days for Marvel, is heralding a new series of monthly comics, and I don't hold much hope for the comic monthly having the same impact as the original Starstruck. But nevertheless, I'll wait and see how well they do that. One comic monthly that I got very sick and tired of with quickly was a series called The Omega Men. It was a DC release on beautiful coloured paper, said to be the newest thing in science fiction and fantasy, and I found it quite disappointing. I noticed when I was in at Space Merchants, and you could probably also get this comic out at Ralph Pay's comic book store in Eastvic Park. It's at Eastvic Park, almost on the edge of the causeway, that the Omega Men has taken a new turn of late, and they've been inviting in guest artists to do work with the stories in question. Alex Nino drew the comic for number 22, and Kevin O'Neill has drawn number 24, and this is the one I'm talking about. The comic costs around about $2.35. Gordon and Gotch are distributing them, and for that price you get a very slick production indeed. Having said that, the story of this Kevin O'Neill artwork, and Kevin O'Neill is one of the people I really like from 2000 AD, is very trite indeed. A group of the Omega Men are trapped in the Master's testing pit, if you like, on a particular planet called Akara, and the leaders who are testing them are devising all sort of physical and psychological shocks for them, but really it's a comic starting nowhere and going nowhere, and in the meantime we get a couple of nice Kevin O'Neill drawn aliens, but apart from that I really don't think Omega Men can take too much more of stretching. DC are stretching me, as one reader, to the limit. And finally, while talking about comics, a third one that's come my way, thanks to Hodder and Stoughton, is the fact that Valerian, the French-Belgian comic strip and characters of, well, almost 15 years duration now, has finally found its way into an English paperback. Hodder with Daugaard, the Belgian publishers, have brought out Ambassador of the Shadows as the first of the Valerian books to make its way to the shelf. I did notice a second in English out there, and I would commend them to you. Ambassador of the Shadows is a weaker story of the Valerian stuff that I'm familiar with. It's beautifully drawn. It's a comic that for the French-Belgian market fits midway between the adult audience and the juvenile audience. For those of you who are only familiar with French comics from Asterix and from Hergé's work, then you might enjoy Valerian. It's the work of two characters, Menzeres and Christian, and their work is a delight to look at. Well, that's enough for this week. More next week, and this time I'll be centering on just one book. I'm going to be looking at Gregory Benford's Against Infinity, a book I've been saving up for some time. I hope to have your ears and your company then. Until then, bye for now.
Great big wonderful galaxy.
You have been listening to the Faster Than Light radio show, produced and recorded in the audio studios of Murdoch University for 6UVS FM.